I saw in Steve something I'd never seen in a CEO before. He had a passion for product that was so unique and refreshing. And he thought about the world in a very different way. And I was taken in the first meeting with him, and I wanted to throw caution to the wind and join, despite the condition of the company.
That is Apple CEO Tim Cook on meeting Steve Jobs and his decision to join Apple on CBS Sunday Morning. Apple's CEO was doing something there that he and his company try not to do. Look back at the past. But there's good reason the future-forward CEO is being particularly nostalgic. In just a few weeks, on April 1st, Apple will turn 50 years old. That milestone, more than enough reason for our next guest to take on a lofty challenge, put the company's complex history into a book worthy of the iconic company. David Pogue is the man who conducted that interview with Tim Cook you just heard, and he's also behind the new book. It's out today, Apple, the First 50 Years. David, tremendous pleasure to talk to you. I've loved you throughout your whole career. This is bucket list interview. I'm happy you're on the show.
Well, bucket list for me to hear an introduction like that.
So, David, listen, why don't we start off with Steve Jobs? Because I think for a lot of people, they think of Apple, they think of Steve Jobs. In your book, whatever you think of Steve Jobs, his genius, his volatility, his passion, his pettiness, you have to admit he pulled off the greatest turnaround in American history. Let's talk about the saving of Apple. What a great part of your book in those 50 years.
Oh, man. Yeah, he was gone for 11 years in the middle of Apple's history, and the company started sinking into decline. It devolved into fiefdoms and backstabbing, and it was also just a product mess. They had 50 different Mac models. No one could remember the difference between the Performa 6115 CD and the Performa 475A. They had 12 different competing ad agencies with different messages. My favorite story is the day 2 Apple lawyers showed up in trademark court to sue each other. I mean,
yeah.
That's what a disaster it was. And Jobs came in. He killed off the printers. He killed off the Newton. He just shut down enormous numbers of projects, including all but 4 of their products. Like, they went from 50 down to 4, saying, if we could put our top engineers on only 4 products, they'll all be amazing. It was not a popular decision. I mean, people were quitting over this. They thought, who is Steve Jobs? He failed the first time at Apple. He went and he started Next, and that failed. Why is he our CEO? But somehow he pulled it off in a single year.
Was it the ability to focus? You meant going from 50 products to 4, you need focus. Was that the number one thing that made Steve Jobs the visionary?
That was one of the 2 number one things. He focused not just on the product line like we talked about, but also focus within a product. His whole thing was, I'll say no to 1,000 new features before I say yes to one that really matters. And you could tell. Like, I spent 13 years reviewing stuff at the New York Times, and Samsung would come in with their tablet and it had 15 buttons on it. And Apple's had 1.
Yeah.
But the other thing that Jobs was so good at that I don't see how anyone can replicate was this uncanny ability to see the future. He just knew what people would want. He knew what would sell. He knew what technology was coming down the pike with unbelievable taste. Over and over and over, he pulled that off, even when it seemed like he was making a terrible mistake.
In your book, and I tell you, I got through it in 2 days. It was such, and for someone that loves Apple, right, I was just like voraciously reading it. But you also point this out. It wasn't just Steve Jobs that saved the company. There were other decisions made, stuff that I had no idea about. Why don't we talk about, this is a company that was days away from bankruptcy at one point. What are the other key decisions that saved the company?
Well, one provocative statement that I make in the introduction is that the Newton saved Apple. And a lot of people are saying, what are you talking about? The Newton was, of course, a terrible failure as a product. But when they were looking for a chip to power that thing, they found this little company in England called ARM, and Apple's like, wow, your chips are low power in terms of battery, but high power in terms of processing. We will invest $3 million in you. if you'll supply us with the chips for the Newton. And so that deal went through. And then 6 years later, ARM had gone public and was now making chips for every electronics company in the world. Apple's investment was now worth $800 million. And they used that money to buy Next, Steve Jobs' company. And that's what brought Jobs back to the company. So if Apple had not made that investment in this tiny chip company, there would have been no third act for Apple.
No Apple. Geez. Can I ask you about, again with Steve Jobs, the so-called reality distortion field? And as a tech reviewer, I know you had to live it. I dabbled in that early on in my career too, so I know how that works. Why don't we talk about the reality distortion field and just tell our listeners what that means?
The term came from a Star Trek episode, but they applied it to Steve Jobs because he was the master of persuasion. He was so charismatic and his logical arguments were so persuasive that he could convince you of the impossible, and frequently did, even, and this is important, even if the next week he changed his mind 100% the opposite direction. He frequently did that. And there's hundreds of pages to say about Steve Jobs. He was very volatile. He would rip people apart critically. And there are two theories that I kept hearing from people I spoke to. One is that he was just cruel. He was just mean. But the other was that he was, I don't know if I can say this on the radio, and there are two kinds of a-holes.
Yeah.
There's egocentric ones, which is 90% of the people, of the jerks in Silicon Valley. And then there's Steve Jobs, who was a mission-driven a-hole. He was reaming you to get better work out of you, to make you reach inside yourself and attain engineering feats you didn't think you could do. And so many people said that happened to me. Like, I told him, you can't do that in this much memory. And he would scream at me, and I'd go back and I'd figure out a way.
Well, and there certainly is a difference there, especially when it comes to results. We're with David Pogue, author of the new book out today, Apple, The First 50 Years. When you're doing a book on Apple, I guess it's a requirement. You have to make the book beautiful. So kudos, right? The book is beautiful in and of itself. It's got to be a product, like an Apple product, I imagine. But let me ask you, one of the things I enjoyed, you interject throughout the book, like the products itself. Like this computer came out this year, and little sidebars, right?
Yeah.
Through all that, what's your favorite Apple device that nobody talks about?
I think my all-time favorite Mac was the PowerBook Duo. Nobody talks about this thing. It was a sub notebook. It was 80% of the size of a MacBook today, very small, very light, no floppy drive. And it was, at a time when that was a shocking move to leave off the floppy drive. But it was so light. It was like today the equivalent would be an iPad with the keyboard case on it. It was just this little thing, and you could just, standing in line for a movie, you could whip it out and look something up, or perch it on your knee while you're having a sandwich. It was so little. And then when you got home, they sold this other thing called a Duo Dock, which was like a giant VCR, and the laptop was the tape. So you'd push, you'd close it and push it into the slot, and all of a sudden you had a giant screen, a real keyboard, a real mouse, all your external hard drives, everything was already attached. Yeah. And so suddenly you had a full-on desktop situation. But when you were on the road, it was just the Duo.
Listen, that love of product comes through. And also, it's really nice to see some of the products that Apple didn't make, things I'd never seen before, where you got photos and pictures of products that never saw the light of day. I absolutely love that. In the moments we have left here, David, let's talk about how the iPhone changes everything. So, you look back at that and the unveiling. How did the iPhone really supercharge the company?
I mean, it didn't at first. For the first year, there was no app store. So there was no, Tinder, Airbnb, DoorDash, Grubhub, and none of those things existed until the iPhone opened it up to apps. But for the first year, they gave you 16 apps and you liked it. And it was an okay seller.
And Steve Jobs was the guy that didn't want the app store. Correct.
He was Mr. Closed Systems. He did not believe in opening up any of his products. But finally, he was overruled, and the iPhone changed the world and us in ways that we're still trying to get a handle on.
Can I ask you if you have a thought or two on the current CEO, Tim Cook, and your great interview you did with him on CBS Sunday Morning, your thoughts on his reign as CEO and just how much time is left in that reign? A lot of people are saying he's going to be gone soon. There will be another CEO. What's your take?
Well, he is 65. He's not saying, of course, that he's going to step down anytime soon. He's done astonishingly well, right? He's tripled the headcount of the company and quadrupled its profits and revenues and stock value. So in every metric, he's done a stunning job. We all miss the days of there's a new iPad, there's a new platform like iPod, iPad, iPhone. Those days are gone. Steve Jobs isn't here anymore to do it. And people are like, oh, it's because Tim Cook isn't a product guy. But you know what? No other company has come up with anything that significant either. So maybe that era of miniaturization of components and the public getting used to electronics is over. And we're in a different era, one of software and services now, which is where Tim's putting his money.
And he's been good at it. Let me end on challenging you on one point of the book. Because you write about Ron Wayne, right? One of the three founders of Apple. Wozniak, Jobs, and Ron Wayne own 10% of the company. And then he, like a few days after they start the company, he sells the shares back. And he says he's got no regrets. I don't believe it for a second, David. I don't believe it for a second that he's got no regrets. He'd be a cajillionaire.
You know what? Tomorrow night at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California, I'm hosting a big event for all these old Apple people to come back and say a few words. And he's going to be there. He's in his 90s. He's never done an interview. Wow. That quote came from his book. And I'm going to ask him live. So awesome. You can watch the live stream and we'll see what he says.
David, like I said, bucket list, checking it off. You're great. The book's great. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you so much, man. So much fun.
David Pogue, his new book out today, Apple, The First 50 Years.
The newest tracks. Let's go. New music. And the next big thing.
Always on the new music first.
Your first place to hear it all.
'Cause you gon' like it, love it, wanna play it twice. Playing now.
iHeart New Music. Your digital station for brand new drops, fresh finds, and tomorrow's bangers.
I think we need something new.
Discover iHeart New Music. Always fresh, always first. Stream now on the free iHeartRadio app.